All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is Let's Talk Teaching. I'm Sarah Roberts-Cady. I teach in the philosophy department. I think I know almost all of you here. And I organize these Let's Talk Teaching sessions. Today, it's kind of an exciting and different format. We're going to do a panel discussion, as you can see, with some experts here. This is on being a student or being the parent of a student with autism here at Fort Lewis College. And what I'd like to do first is just introduce everybody. So first, this is Ethan Trampler, but he likes to go by E.T. So he's a current student here at Fort Lewis College. And then we have Janice and Ed Archuleta, whose son Joe is a current student here at Fort Lewis College. And then we're hoping our third panelist will come, who's an alum of Fort Lewis College, Matt Cornell. Hopefully when he comes in, he can just pop in and join us. The format for today is as follows. It's going to be a little loose, but we want to start. We really have two questions for our panelists. One, if they could help us understand what's challenging about being a student on the autism spectrum here at Fort Lewis College, what things are especially challenging and difficult, and then what things faculty can do that are helpful. And I said, just be really specific. I want to hear, what do teachers do that make it easier for you? What do teachers do that make it harder for you? How can we be supportive? So Ed is going to do a little introduction first, if that's okay. Ed, can I hand it over to you? And I'm sorry, and Diane Jenkins here is our disability director, and she's going to moderate, not me. I'm going to sit down and take notes and learn. So I'll hand it over to all of you.
I'm Ed. Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. So my son, like Sarah said, is a current student here. He's been going here a few semesters. And it is a challenge for him. It's quite a challenge for him. And I think back, so I started school late. I started college when I was 22. And there's no way that I had the wherewithal to start college. I knew I wanted to do it, but I had to make the decision. And I would never go back to the age of 20 in my early 20s. I want to start out as, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for E.T. or other students here. They can speak for themselves. But for me, I would not go back to that age. And I wasn't on the autism spectrum. So just put yourself, I just kept to ask you, put yourselves in your student shoes for all your students, whether they're on the spectrum or not, of what it's like to be in your early 20s and figuring out where you belong in this world and where you're going. It's really hard, and I wouldn't do it again. Not for anything. You all deal with students, so just consider that. I am not an autism specialist, so I'm not going to speak to that. But I will encourage you you can Google executive functions, and many of you probably already have or know about it. But executive functions, Joe's counselor taught me about that. And it's basically self-regulation and management skills, self-management skills that we all develop, and some of us struggle with. Co-workers I have, employees I have that aren't identified to be on the spectrum struggle with them. So it's just more pronounced for my son, very pronounced. Clear direction, clear and consistent direction written where it can go back and be referenced, not just one direction in passing verbally, and you walk away and you think that the person gets it. In my workplace, I work with a bunch of engineering technicians and engineers. It's the same thing. People have to hear direction multiple times before they really understand the scope of the job. And when you're on the spectrum, for my son, it's that much more needed. Campus works and it doesn't work. Canvas, sorry. But it's not consistent across all those pages, and it's quite difficult for me to navigate that and find that information. It really is. So just consistent, clear communication. Janny can add to that. So just be patient and offer accommodations. I'd say my dream, what I'd really like to see come out of this little meeting, eventually grow, is for this school to have a well-structured program that offers support to disability students. There's no college or university in Colorado, what I can tell, that offers that. There are colleges and universities out there that do offer strong support. University of Arizona in Tucson has what they call the SALT program, strategic alternate learning techniques, University in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. And then there's Landmark College in Vermont. That's more specialized to kids with disabilities. If that was offered here, a stronger program, and Diane's been doing a great job, I really do applaud her and her help, I wouldn't have to consider sending Joe to Tucson, away from home, to get those services, because I really do think he needs them to be successful. So it's additional cost on top of tuition, $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000 a semester, but in my opinion, it'd be worth it. So a short story, and I know I'm taking too much time. Joe went to school in Mancos, all the way through school. He had an IEP when he was 6 years old, first grade. He was identified around that around that time. And there's two teachers. We'll call Mrs. and Mrs. Jones to protect the guilty. The first teacher, he had her by 5th grade, thereabouts. Didn't want anything to do with Joe. Didn't look at the IEP, didn't read the IEP, didn't care about the IEP, pushed him off to the resource teacher. Had no interest in a lifelong educator, did not want to support this kid.
What's an IEP?
Individual education plan.
Thank you.
The second Mrs. Jones was the art teacher over there. Was more accommodating, more patient, got to know Joe more. And the best example I can have is there was one art project where the students were supposed to craft this plain ceramic ball. Well, Joe doesn't follow directions that well all the time. And he took it to the next level. He made this really cool little sculpture, a hedgehog from it. And she allowed him to do it. You know, she allowed him to expand beyond what the directions were, take a different path. That's what I like to see this school become, is the second Mrs. Jones, not the first. So, thank you.
So part of the reason that we really wanted the parents here as well is because unlike a lot of the students with disabilities that I work with, although there are some, that because of the executive function planning and time management and paying attention to everything, that's where the brain really struggles with, and it's different certainly in everybody. Anybody who's on the spectrum. It's kind of, I always tell my students, I might have green eyes and you have green eyes, but our green eyes look different nonetheless. So how the disability affects students will look different on each one. So it's truly individualized. So a lot of the times when we have somebody like Joe and we have a couple others that I work with the parents as well. So it takes the team, it's that take the village piece. So it's working with you all, and then what I find out from you, then I can pass it on to the parents, and then in the evening when the student's back at home, then parents can follow up. And then sometimes I meet with the students weekly, but they don't always tell me everything straight up, and they might say something to the parents, so we're just kind of communicating. So this is how we're kind of massaging it and making it happen, so where other people's executive functioning is working without all these other people, we're the other parts of the brain that maybe aren't working as well, not meaning that they don't have the intelligence to do it, it's just organizing all this kind of stuff, So that's why we really wanted the parents. The IEPs, I just kind of want to clarify that a lot of the students come with these IEPs, individual education plans, and that means that K through 12, there was some difficulty, there was something going on. They weren't reading up to their peers, something with math, something. And so the K through 12 school system has what's called FAPA, free and appropriate public education. They have to provide something to get the students up to par. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a disability, it means there was a difficulty. And at some point, they have to say, okay, it's a disability. And this is where I come in then in college, saying we have to prove it's a disability, not a difficulty. And being diagnosed on the spectrum has been kind of loosey-goosey up to recently as well, I think. So, Janice, did you want to start out with something too before we go into the questions?
I hadn't really prepared anything.
That's okay.
I guess I'll just, just kind of jump on what you just said and reinforce it that the kids are very oftentimes brilliant kids, and they just can't learn the way that everybody else can, like you and I. And so, you know, it seems like there should be some other way to delve into their brains and tweak that learning process so that they can learn and they can, you know, be tested somehow in that realm. So that's kind of my take on it.
So just out of curiosity, you've been going, E.T., when did you find out diagnosed on the spectrum?
Well, my parents first found out when I was about a few months after I was born, I think. I'm trying to recall. But I've known that I've had Asperger's syndrome all my life. And it's been a very, very huge part of my identity. I've always felt very, I guess, outside the norm. You know, when everyone else was off doing, you know, stuff that they were interested in, I would often just, you know, sit there and just be like a robot, I guess. I wouldn't really show interest in that sort of things that other people would mostly find, you know, interesting or compelling, that sort of that shared across a lot of people. I guess what I'm trying to say is my brain works differently, and there's not a whole lot that I can do about that other than just to, you know, embrace that and make it work and keep on living.
Okay. Hi, Matt. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. So what about you? When were you first diagnosed, and how have you dealt with that?
A bit of a story. Sorry about that. I guess my parents first noticed I had certain quirks, if you would, when I was about 2. But it was, everybody was hesitant to diagnose me with ASD, because, you know, bear in mind, the definition has evolved over time as new studies and discoveries are discovered on the subject. And I didn't seem anything out of the ordinary with some aspects of it. But back then, this was 93. Hey, autism was kind of thought of as a dirty word. And the reaction was, I think, typically one of pity or dismissal. That's all. And I'm sure a lot of people with ASD share that. So finally, at 3, I was diagnosed with what was termed then as pervasive development disorder. So a kind of high-functioning autism. And it later became, Asperger's syndrome and mild to moderate autism. And I didn't really take notice of it until I was in my late grade 8 elementary school years. And even then, it wasn't made a big deal out of because my parents didn't want me to think I was, retarded, essentially.
Right.
And so I do share the antisocial experience. That's with quite a few people with ASD. But that's it sort of make my learning experience a bit quirky, and certainly special classes as I had to take to work on my speech, work on my manners. My emotional and social prowess was a bit of a late bloomer. And even today, that's something I have to deal with. But intellectually, I was in some ways ahead of the game. Because because I could receive the knowledge just fine. It was communicating it and expressing it, that was a big issue.
And if I can add to that, I think from our experience, receiving the education or learning comes differently. I mean, for our son, it's like, this guy, he remembers stuff for a long time, details, facts, and he learns very well auditory and visual. You know, he'll learn from videos or movies. He's big on history YouTubes, and he just remembers. That is somewhat easier for him, method for him to learn. That gets into his brain and it stays there. But reading comprehension is really difficult for him. He has a hard time with that. And one thing that upsets people is you may be talking to him and he won't have eye contact with you, but he'll be doing something else. But he's a sponge. That stuff will just soak into his head. He doesn't need to be rigid and looking at you to understand, to learn. So everybody, it's back to what Matt said, everybody learns different. Someone said that previously.
Yeah.
And these guys, these kids are a good example of learning outside the typical norm.
You graduated from here, Matt? From Fort Lewis?
Yes, in the spring of 2013, so
Okay.
roughly 5 years ago.
Okay, and what's your degree?
History.
Okay.
In hindsight, no big surprise.
Very good.
Yeah, I can share that experience that when it comes to visual things, I can absorb that just fine. And, you know, movies get me hooked into other interests far better than books ever could. And that being said, whenever we did have a movie, be it a Hollywood movie or a documentary, I could just soak that in. And even as long as there's some amount of visual representation in a structured subject, I can learn that knowledge. It's not a perfect record, but I can take that in a lot better. And of course, that meant where I really struggled was the abstract subjects, things like literature and English. It's not that I couldn't understand the words that I read on the page. It's that I could not grasp the deeper meaning. Even when I had tutors, I just didn't get it. And you know, I shared this concern with Temple Grandin from one of her TED Talks. It's one of our heroes, by the way. And that one of the things that we're concerned with is the education is becoming a bit too abstract, particularly for people with autism. So in order to really deal with the subjects of English and literature, I had to really learn to, in a sense, translate the words on the pages into projecting a movie in my head. And because I do tend to think in pictures, and then relying on my imagination to fill in the blanks.
I heard that. What about you? Do you think that same way? Do you process similarly?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's different in my case because I've been reading for a long time, and reading has never been that big of an issue for me. But what Matt said about abstract concepts is very true for my case, especially with mathematics. Oh boy, I have struggled with math for so long, and it was particularly worsened by some less than savory teachers in the past. So a quick rundown. Back in
Another Mrs. Jones.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. So way back in first grade, I went to Kaiser Elementary School, and it was all right. It was a moderately good school. They understood my problems in a meaningful way. However, there was this one teacher that didn't. And I can't quite remember her name now because I forcibly ejected it from my brain, because I don't want to relive those memories.
Probably for the best.
Probably for the best, yeah. But she was my math teacher, and there were like 20 other kids there with me, and it was hell. Whenever we got a problem wrong, she had this ruler, and she would slam it down on our desks, and that sort of created this averse reaction to mathematics as a whole. Just because A, I couldn't understand it, I didn't know what I was doing wrong, and she refused to explain it. And B, it was just so abstract and just so confusing, and I've always struggled ever since. And I mean, it just goes to show what doing that kind of stuff at a young age, especially to a kid who has trouble learning these sorts of topics, can really do. So I would say the biggest lesson you can take from that story is to just be understanding and be more, receptive to kids having trouble, and especially kids with Asperger's and autism like myself and Matt here.
And offer alternative methods to get the solution, right? That's one of the frustrating things that I've had is, it's gotta be done this way, it's gotta be turned in like this, and you have to work with a group of people. And that's a couple questions I like to ask these guys. That's hard working with a group of people when you have this disability, and to force these kids to work with a group of people or to do these assignments the way you want it by God is really frustrating to me. And I know it is to Joe as well. It's like, well, I don't fit in that mold. I'm sorry. But I have a question for these guys, if I can. When did you accept your disability, or really not understanding, but you both said that, but accept that it's okay to ask for help and to ask for accommodations?
Well, I think I've always known that it's okay to ask for help, but I've never really acted on it anyways, just because I wanted to prove that I could still do it, that I can still do it without any help. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, especially in elementary school. It was kind of a grab bag. I mean, in high school, I got an IEP, and I, with the extra time and the resources and things like that, and even then I didn't always act on them because I really wanted to prove that I could do the work without needing these sorts of resources. And like I said, sometimes I've succeeded and sometimes I failed in spectacular fashion, and and it's been rough, but I think it sort of took me a while for that realization to really set inside my head that it's okay to do this. It's okay to ask for help, and I'll still sometimes be averse to that and just be like, nah, I got this. But sometimes that push, it does help. It really does.
Matt?
Asking for help? Yeah. In my elementary school years, I didn't think a lot of it because it was always there. But in middle school, it became sort of optional, in which I could ask for help when I needed. And, sometimes I might behave like macho, but it was there when I needed it. And that was important, particularly as an ASPE, to, ASPE, by the way, is someone with Asperger's syndrome, but know that I had that kind of backup and support when I really needed it. Thanks. And going back to the thing with different teaching methods, I mentioned how even with tutors, I just had trouble reading in English, not necessarily dialecting English, but the abstract concepts. It took very patient and persistent effort. And even then, and if the teachers didn't adjust their method of teaching, I had to adjust my method of learning.
So
That's credit to you to be able to do that.
So keep going, Matt. So what is your biggest challenge as a college student when you were here? What was as a student? What do you felt was the biggest challenge?
Well, as a student, I've come a long way from the early grade school years. And, I was able to choose my subjects, because one thing I think you'll notice about many people with ASD, if not all of them, the interest is incredibly specialized. So, they could be not that good at a lot of subjects, but they're really, really excellent at one specific subject. Like, for instance, and my specialized interest is steam trains and railroading. Okay. Granted, I've gotten a more diversified set since then, but so that was the specialized interest and love and subject that I've carried with me since I was 3. And so anyway, going to the college years, it was not that difficult. I could choose my subjects, especially since I got the mandatory classes on my curriculum out of community college.
Oh, okay.
Right, so, and there was still that big of a nagging drag with the abstract subjects, like whatever literature came my way. Okay? But if it was out of a textbook, if it was out of a film, I could receive it not perfectly, but really great. And I think another sort of snag was, my interest specialization. And, I was too much in it, I had to stay with it. And I think at least 1 or 2 professors saw that as a bit of a weakness, in which, you had to have an incredibly diversified set of interests, and a diversified set of topics you want to research, etc. I mean, eventually, it got to the point where I could sort of adjust it a little bit, but I could still stick with my interest. It's just from a different angle. But apart from a couple of snags, I didn't have as many problems in my college years as I did my grade school years. But the biggest challenge was not in the classroom. It was because something's outside the classroom. So in particular, living with roommates, or having that kind of a social life, which it was always a challenge since I was a bit of an antisocial individual. So I never got into groups by choice. I was never the initiator. I just waited for an invitation. Outside the classroom and inside the classroom, I just wait with whoever the teacher assigned. That being said, when one group does invite me in, and I felt that kind of acceptance.
E.T., this is your first year as a freshman at college. So what struggles are you coming up with?
Well, struggling to recall. Memory recall, that's a big issue right there. I think the biggest struggle so far is not having this is one of those moments where I had a thought
Come back.
and it got away. Yeah, you come
You want
up.
us to come back to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Janice and Ed?
I just need to say something somewhat related. If Joe was here, he'd be very adamant that he not be called someone with Asperger's, because Asperger's is an old term,
Oh.
and it's still accepted, but he'd be demanding that that's not, he has autism, higher function autism, but it's not Asperger's. I'm just telling you, that's just, everybody's different. He'd be adamant.
So what struggles do you see, Janice, that Joe has?
Oh,
As a
just, focus and, the other day we kind of had this, a couple different projects, he just doesn't know how to start, and, he just, and then he gets it's due, he needs to hand it in, and he starts having these panic attacks, and then, it just makes it even worse and worse. So maybe the thing to do is to, for the teachers here to, maybe give some examples, or maybe have some examples online of what this assignment entails, especially if it has to do with a wide, open-ended thing like a response paper. It's like, it was just so hard for him to grasp exactly what he should do and stuff like that. So, good examples
Like the completed assignment, what a completed assignment looks like.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that would be a good thing, so that, somebody could kind of just, okay, I kind of know what's going on. Or, and maybe even chop it up into, I know that Joe, the open, wide questions are, I remember there was this one teacher, she said, you can write a paper about anything you choose, and maybe some kids would relish that. And he was just, well, it was too wide for him, It just had to be a subject that could be pointed, and even some of his questions on tests, instead of the discuss, two different principles or whatever, just write it, make it specific questions, What is this principle? Explain it and give it an example, and then have the other one, because just they have such a hard time with coming up with detailed answers, and the more pointed I think the question is, at least for him, the better he did at it.
I can kind of relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
That with that's not to say I can't answer open-ended questions, but I'm kind of doing a new book at the moment detailing my experiences as someone with autism and Asperger's, and initially I was hesitant to write it because of that very basic question. What is it like to be you? That's not a bad question to ask, but for me it's a bit too broad, because if I had a Post-it note for every detail of my life, the wall would be the size of Titanic. Too big to view in a single glimpse. I need more parameters. I need more specifics. That's, what specific aspect would you like to know about? And going back to the main question of what were they challenged, is there was something of kind of the opposite extreme, where if you could get my attention on a subject, the problem was restraint. Because even when I was little, I had an attention span like you would not believe. And there was a couple projects where I went a bit over the top. And they had to cut me off on the time. So.
Yeah, there was a assignment for Joe that was on Egyptology. No problem, man. Just write something, on this king or that king or whatever. He could do it because he loves that stuff. It's back to, just being a sponge on topics that are of interest. And I think, I'm about these guys, but if it's not of interest, it's really hard to get started. And think back to what I said. When I was in my 20s doing college, I couldn't start something that I wasn't interested in. It was hard, to just take that initial step and define what the composition paper was supposed to be on. But if it was something of interest, it was that much easier to write.
Can I add two things I'm hearing really clearly that harken back to the previous Let's Talk Teaching we had on this topic? And that is one thing that with autism, it's hard when you don't have your executive functioning the same way as other folks, picking out which details matter. So you see the full span of a bajillion details and you don't know which ones are the ones that matter to put it into the paper. So the detail and the assignment, and both, going too far and not knowing where to start, are both that same problem of figuring out which details matter in the ginormous options of details. So the really clear rubric, the really clear directions are aiming at helping them figure out which details matter. And the other suggestion that Diane had before on this topic of interest is linking your course to that topic of interest. Because a lot of these students, just like Matt, have a primary area of interest. So if you can find some way to link, trains and history were the easy one, but trains and literature aren't that hard to link together either, right? So finding ways to take the interest to the topic in your class when they do have a project or paper can make it easier to start and stay focused.
So I'm just wondering if all of you would mind giving maybe your perspective on how we can best signal as teachers our openness to discussions about alternative arrangements, about providing more structure when the assignment doesn't feel structured enough, about providing extra help or discussion about how to link it to your area of interest, right? So what can we do either in our syllabus or in our personal presentation to the students at the beginning of the semester to signal that we're open to really helping you with kind of these issues and with providing more structure when it's needed?
I mean, putting it in the syllabus is a big step right there. And, always just reminding that student, if it seems like they're struggling, it seems like they're not getting it, or if they're not focused, or if something else is going wrong that I can't list, just remind them that these services are available. And sometimes we'll be like, yeah, I know, I got it, and such and such. But I think if we hear it enough, we'll eventually do it. And that's sort of what's happened in my case. Is that throughout my school career, I've had these services available to me, and I didn't always take advantage of them. But oftentimes, when I was reminded that these services were available, it was that click in my head that was just like, maybe I should go and see what they have to offer, just to see. That sort of thing.
Matt?
Yeah, I would completely agree. Is that being a bit upfront about inviting them to share whatever problems they have, and just being, I kind of want to say bonding, but being very connecting with that student, and in order to tell them, hey, I'm here to help, and there are alternative services that are on offer should you ask for them. And I do mention this in the book I'm writing. And getting to know the condition is just half the battle. The other half is getting to know the person himself or herself on occasion.
And I just add to that, if that student's being helped, assisted by Diane, that be passed on to Diana too, because it goes back to what she said earlier. It comes from many fronts, right? That helps with that repetition of knowing that service is available, or that accommodation is available.
Yeah, I think our son and maybe a lot of others, students on the spectrum, would also think, either I can handle it, I don't need it, or I think they would be kind of hesitant to, just bounce up to the teacher and say, okay, I'm one of those students, what can you do for me, and try to negotiate because, first of all, a lot of them aren't very social people, and they might not even know how to approach you. And it's usually, I think, just kind of keep an eye on what their work, how their work is, and whether there's some real weaknesses there, and then say, well, I think maybe we better have a little talk. Yeah, before it's too late.
So think back to, you know, a professor that just got it and provided something that was like, this is it. What was that key? What was something that really helped you?
Certainly my Latin American history professor that was always there whenever I had a question on the subject. Specifically towards my autism, I would think that's a flip of the coin, because I'm not sure everybody knew about it.
Right.
Because, you know, even back in my grade school years, I treated it like a kind of need-to-know thing. Because, as I pointed out, Alex, back when I was first diagnosed, it was thought of as a kind of dirty term. And I think that's an image that I, among many others, I'm sure, are working to dispel. No, we're not just that disability. We're just different. And certain adjustments would have to be made to accommodate for it. Of course, but we can still learn. We can still hold an interest. Yes. And with enough patient and persistent effort, we can even have a social life. Now, going back to, when I treated it as a need-to-know thing, I was in a autism advocate group called the Autism Society of Collin County. The name changed since then, but it's the same basic group. It was, and excuse me if I offend anybody, but I class it as a bit of a mixed experience. It's because I was certainly among others who shared my condition, and there was good help as far as learning with manners and all that kind of thing. But I still found it difficult to communicate with those, in particular, with a more severe condition of autism, because ASD, it does come in varying degrees. And my case was pretty mild. So I think, in hindsight, that certainly had an effect on me, that I knew I was different, but not that different. And so I can kind of relate to Joe's experience, in which, the help was there when I needed it, and I was never that willful against it or oppositional to it, but I kind of wanted to be treated like a mainstreamer in that sense. That's in which, I didn't want to be classed as special treatment just because I had a condition unique among my peers. So, yes, the help would be there when I needed it, but certainly not anything special. I could sort of put forth that notion of the parallel but sometimes contradictory desires of belonging and self-determination.
I'm going to give other people a chance. If anybody else has some other, go ahead.
Professors, of course, we have to sometimes collect our thoughts too, or we have the thought and then it goes away. So,
We're not alone then.
right, of course not. So, I have a concern and a question. So my concern as a professor who has a large group, so I have a large group of students, I have 40, and sometimes I feel like in college, professors have, and I mean, I adhere to this paradigm a lot too. It's like, I am cautious of making an exception unless there's papers. So this idea of show your papers. I feel like in Fort Lewis, I've had a positive, I'm just a professor. I've had a positive experience that, is it the DLC? Is that the initials here? Or the
For
peer?
the DSO, Disability Service
Oh,
Office.
it's the DSO.
Yeah.
So, the DSO has been very proactive, they've been very approachable, and I've even gone in a couple times to kind of personalize the test. And I think that speaks to a small campus, and that's good. The paradigm is, it's like I'm cautious to make exceptions, and I do want to, but also it's sometimes like, and this is not, it's not assigning blame, it's like I've got to get the papers before they say, oh, here's the exception. And again, that's not assigning blame. It's just more like, and so I guess coming from that, actually there was one student who I know signed up for DSO in the middle of class because the student had been doing something. And I just said, so just for everybody to know in the class, I can only assign this if this happens. And the student joined DSO, and I'm like, oh, now I have a better understanding of this. So I guess my question is, when students or anybody involved, they sign up for DSO, is there things that you would like the professor to know above and beyond kind of getting those exceptions? Because I'm also like, I'm fine with, oh, okay, here's the documented stuff. And again, this is a paradigm we deal with in college. Even a student who says, oh, I broke my leg. I'm like, okay, then please send me the photo where you broke your leg. I mean, and maybe I'm more obsessive about that part, but I guess like, what do you have for professors? So you get the documentation, they get the email. What do you want them to know above and beyond?
So what I do is send out the accommodations. And the accommodations are the same for most of the students who come to my office, and I have 285 students. But it's all for different reasons. Might need extra time on a test, might need, something, an alternative to group work or something like that. But they don't know what the disability is. I'm not allowed to tell them. So they just have to go, oh, okay, well, what's that supposed to mean? And I think that's what we're kind of going. And a lot of them would like to know what is going on so that I can maybe help teach to your learning abilities and not to the disabilities. But I'm not allowed to tell them. So once that letter goes out, ideally it'd be nice if the student would go in and talk to the professor and give them a little more information so you have something to go on.
Yeah, and my own sense is I totally agree. I don't need to know what the condition, that's a private thing. But I think I would like to know above and beyond, okay, I got this in late, do you want me to check in? Things like that.
I mean, I've been very open and expressive about my Asperger's for a long time. And, my parents and I would often go into a new school or a new classroom with a teacher, and we would, during parent-teacher conferences sometimes, we would sit down and would say, hey, so yeah, E.T., he has Asperger's, I have Asperger's. And we would outline some of the general, trials and tribulations that sort of entails. And we would work with the teacher or teachers to create some kind of safety net that's sort of alongside the IEP, I think. IEP. Not necessarily for like a rigid structure of like millions of papers and agreements and things to sign off, but just for things in the classroom to remember. Yeah.
I think I'll try to state this clearly. I think part of what you're speaking to, sir, is a need for resources and support for Diane in this college as well. 285 students. I think she's been doing a good job with us, doing the best she can. But I see a need for additional support in this school. I can't speak for her, she can speak for herself, but additional support where she has this group of soldiers, so to speak, that can go help the students communicate with the instructors better, more tutoring services offered, more mentoring on the whole executive functions, time management, self-regulation. She can't do that. This school is not set up for that. But if those resources were established and were out there, I think it would make students and the professor's life a lot easier. Because isn't the goal to make these kids successful?
I want to add to that, just to what we can do on our end as teachers. You mentioned making exceptions for students, and I actually think that's, we don't have to. There's this whole thing called universal design in the classroom, where at the outset, you say, how do I design this course for my diverse students, for my diverse learners, whether they're neurodiverse or physically diverse or however culturally diverse. And at the outset, you're thinking, okay, I've got these learning outcomes, and the learning outcomes aren't questionable. You got to pass these learning outcomes to pass. But there are lots of different ways to get to those learning outcomes. We all know that, because so many different teachers do it differently. Different kinds of assignments you can do to get to that learning outcome, different ways to get the information, and different ways to demonstrate that you have the information. And if you build that into your class at the very beginning, at the outset, what are the diverse ways my students can access this information? Because they all access it differently in different ways. And what are the diverse ways they can demonstrate it? You don't have to make exceptions. So I don't actually ask my students for pictures of their broken legs, and I don't even want to know that they've got the disability service in line, because I want to know who they are and what they need, and I try to build that diversity in at the beginning. In my view, the ideal world would be you don't need a disability service, because every teacher's ready for their diverse learners from the beginning. They're ready to address that diversity.
So I learned this through the IEP process, and it's so valuable. It's, I mean, I think it helps even with just teaching. But the IEP process, and it was kind of a nightmare, in my opinion, because it's all about problems, right? Well, what do you have a problem with? Well, okay, so you need 2.5 hours or whatever because of your problem. And it didn't work. And so somebody came in to do what was called a solutions-based plan. And it's crazy, but it just the shift of, okay, so when you're doing your best, what does that look like? When you're thriving, what does that look like? And so rather than focus on the problem and the exceptions, to look at it as, okay, so when you're doing your best, what does that look like? It makes a world of difference, as opposed to seeing things as problems or challenges that we have to accommodate, as when you're thriving, because that's what we all want, right? We want our students to thrive. So, I mean, I've even thought about it in terms of like students late to class. That's a problem. So what am I going to do to fix the problem? And instead say, when my students are arriving on time and they're thriving, what's the difference there? And it just is a mental shift that remarkably has had a huge, it sounds simple, but it makes a big difference.
That's an excellent mindset to have. I must say, I congratulate you right there.
I didn't invent it. I fortunately found the person who specializes in it. But Kim?
So I have a question about so I have a class in which during lab work, students need to work in groups. And I would love to have some suggestions for good ways to accommodate situations where there may be limited equipment to work with, or that's hard to avoid having to work in groups.
Are the projects too big?
You actually need to have people holding both ends of the tape measure. So some of it's that physically, and sometimes it's limited amount of stuff. But I'm less worried about that than when groups need to communicate things that they've learned to the rest of the class. Because I recognize that even for a wide variety of students, that working together as a team to put together a presentation is really hard. And just listening to this, I'm like, I should not have assigned that way. So, last few weeks of the class. What's a good way, any suggestions from anybody about how to adjust to accommodate that working in groups might be a huge barrier to interest, to success, to all kinds of things? Alternative ways to share and present and demonstrate what you got out of something, that information you collected as a group. Any ideas and suggestions? And I'm happy to even have Sarah give me ideas.
This is a great plug, because we just purchased a webinar on our campus called Collaborative Learning for Neurodiverse Students.
Oh, awesome.
Because group work is one of the hardest things for our neurodiverse students, when that's a barrier. And it's a webinar, it's live on the 19th of April, but we bought the recording too. So I'll send out a link to everybody on that as well. But it's I was so excited to see it, and I don't know the contents of it, so I'm not gonna be able to give you a great grand preview, but I just know that's gonna be a great resource for us as we think about that particular challenge.
Yeah.
Can you say that again?
Collaborative learning for neurodiverse students.
So I think with that, working with the group is an important part of moving on too. So I wouldn't stop that. Maybe just allow other options to be successful if that collaboration isn't working.
Or maybe if it's just a smaller part of your grade,
Yeah.
you know, like 5 points instead of 100, you know, for this group project. I mean, my daughter she's a regular student, and she took a class here, and it was a theater class, and, you know, one of the other groups, everybody got this horrible grade because this one kid never showed up the whole time. I mean, in some way, it just reduced the whole group's effort. But if it can maybe just be a smaller part of the kids' grades, and I don't know. I mean, I know what my son would do if he wasn't included in a group. He would probably take a couple steps away and start living in some movie in his head, and he wouldn't be marking down the important data points and things like that. So, you know, maybe, you know, I could just see stuff like that. But if it's a small enough thing and everybody has to participate for sure, I think that's a way to do it. You know, make sure everybody does something, and they're not allowed to get away from whatever the team experience is.
So as part of the planning process, maybe would it help to have step one, like literally coming up with a list of duties, kind of a timeline for things to be done? Would that really help to structure it?
It's extremely helpful,
Okay.
right there,
Structure.
yeah. Of some kind.
Structure is a big word
Big, yeah.
with those kids.
I need to say a few things. To go back to the question about what a teacher did, you pointed to math team to support. I got to give a good prop to Amy. Amy's not here.
Amy Wendland?
Yeah. Joe had her last year, year before. She understood Joe. She saw he was struggling, taking a testing class, because he wanted to be a typical student. And bless her heart, you know, she went to him and said, Joe, you need to go to the testing center. Just go to the testing center, it's okay. And she accommodated that. And she initiated it. And that was a big help to him, just her understanding. And then Janice said something when we talked about struggles for these kids. I don't know about Matt and ET, but for Joe and some others I've met, they are always processing. They're always thinking. Joe is just thinking. You can see in his eyes, he's thinking about something. It's always going on in his head. He's visualizing something. And when you talk to him, he might be working on an assignment, but he's thinking of something else. And that's hard for us as adults without autism to recognize that. And he had a little run-in with the teacher last semester because he was thinking of a movie. And he spat out some words. He was thinking out loud, you know, about some lines from a movie. And the professor took offense at that. And there wasn't anything there, but Joe was just processing, focused, doing something, but something else was going on in his head, multitasking in his head. And read the executive functions. Try to understand. It helps just how these guys process.
I finally collected my thoughts to answer the question of struggles here. So I really can't say a definitive answer because A, I haven't been at this school, at this college long enough to really mark anything down other than just some of the stuff I've experienced in the past before. But part of that B is that I don't want to admit I've been struggling. And that's, I think a lot of kids with autism and Asperger's may like myself want to prove they can do it and want to, not admit that they're really struggling. And I mean, counseling services and centers like what you have running is extremely, extremely helpful in sort of allowing us a safe space to, really express what we have been struggling with. And, sometimes we might still hide it, or sometimes we might still, not tell you. But it takes time sometimes. And I think that's one of the biggest things as a whole, is that it takes time, and patience and understanding is just the most important thing. And that being said, I have been struggling with assignments and due dates sometimes, just because I either don't understand like the context of the assignment, I otherwise can't do it. Like writing a paper an academic paper is incredibly hard for me. However, I can write fiction really well. And I mean, at least that's what I like to think, and we'll let that But, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I myself personally have struggled with, putting down these sort of complex, sentence structures and all these different rules and things like that for academic writing. It's like I put in a box. And the only way for me to really get through it and do it is to break the box or get out of the box and do something
Think
completely.
outside the box.
Yeah, and could do something completely different from what you guys think, and you may not like that, and it's just, it might not totally adhere to the regulations and the rules and the parameters of the assignment that you set, but sometimes that's just the way it is, and there's always going to be people, whether or not they have autism or some other disability of some kind, that they're going to see a problem and they're going to do it from a completely different angle, from an angle that you didn't expect, but that still works, no matter what.